Okay, good evening, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and call to order the Wednesday, March 4th, 2020 meeting of the City of Reno Capital Improvements Advisory Committee. And we will start by asking everyone to rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, and I'll ask Commissioner Gower to lead us this evening. Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Michelle, can we have roll call, please?
Sorry. Kathleen Taylor? Here. Peter Gower? Ed Hawkins?
Here.
John Marshall is absent. Paul Olivas is absent. Alex Felto?
Here.
Mark Johnson?
Here.
We have a quorum.
Okay, thank you very much. Next is public comment. This item is for either public comment on any action item or any general public comment. Michelle, do we have any request to speak forms on this item?
No, we do not.
Okay, with that, I will close public comment and move to item 4, public hearing, which is item 4.1, recommendation to City Council, Capital Improvements Advisory Review of Land Use Assumptions and Capital Improvements Plan to develop impact fees for police facilities as enabled by NRS 278B. How's that for an intro?
Quite an intro.
Good evening, Sienna. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Capital Improvements Advisory Committee. For the record, Sienna Reed, Senior Planner. Staff is here before you tonight to start the first step in the statutory review process that is outlined to move forward with the implementation of a police facility impact fee. And so tonight, here, what we're looking for is really your recommendation to City Council on the draft land use assumptions, the draft capital improvements program, and then the associated fee schedule that would facilitate that impact fee moving forward. In terms of the documents before you tonight, I do want to highlight you have the draft CIP that includes the land use assumptions, the methodology used to create the impact fee, and then also you have a draft administrative manual. And this is something that's been prepared that would help assist in the implementation of the impact fee, really from the staff level. And it's been provided for reference for you tonight. All right, so to start out here with a little bit of background, in November of 2019, Council directed staff to go forth and analyze the feasibility of impact fee systems, not only for the qualified portions of the Reno Police Department Public Safety Center, but also for the construction of fire stations. After we received that direction, we started that evaluation process, looked at a variety of different methods, but focusing on police facilities, so that qualified portion of the Public Safety Center. We do have future efforts anticipated in terms of looking at fire stations, but that type of impact fee system is a bit more complex, and we do anticipate that we'll be getting potentially some consulting assistance to help in that work effort. So after taking a look at that feasibility, we figured at this point in time it was possible to move forward with the police facility impact fee, and we started development community outreach early this year. So as part of that outreach, we provided presentations to BAN, to AGC, and then also to NAOP. In terms of the new Public Safety Center, before really kind of digging into the methods associated with the CIP, it is helpful to have a little bit of background on what is actually being planned, the costs associated with it. So really wanted to give you just a little bit more overview there first. So the new Public Safety Center is going to be located on the old RGJ site, and that is on Kinsley. What it will serve as is a replacement for the current RPD headquarters located at 455 East 2nd Street, and that East 2nd Street main station would close upon opening and completion of the Public Safety Center. Our staff did evaluate, and really Public Works staff here, taking a look at, is it possible to upgrade and update the existing main station at 2nd Street? And they determined that it really wasn't cost effective at this particular time. There's a lot of improvements that are pretty expensive that need to be made. As many of you know, asbestos and lead abatement, definitely not small costs. The sewer main is original 1947 in terms of the building, same thing with the electrical. So definitely some older improvements there. In addition, one of the things that makes the current headquarters building difficult is just the size of it. What we have are facilities that have become deconsolidated. We have evidence storage offsite. We also have our dispatch offsite. And so that does make it a little bit more difficult to provide the most efficient possible police service to our citizens. How much is this new public safety center going to cost? The current estimate from our Public Works Department is $33 million, and that equates to $299 per square foot. And it does include the land and building cost of the RGJ building, which has been purchased by the City of Reno. It's important to note, though, that of that $33 million, only a small portion can actually be attributed to new development. And what we have today in terms of our existing facilities, we have approximately 100,657 square feet that is composed of that headquarters on 2nd Street, offsite evidence storage, offsite dispatch. So in terms of that portion that can be attributed to new development, it's by state law really just the portion that's the expansion. And that is approximately 9,843 square feet, getting us to the total of the planned 110,500 square feet for the new public safety center. And in terms of just thinking about this in terms of the overall project cost, that $2.9 million that is associated with the expansion portion of the public safety center, that's the estimate for the 9,000 and change square feet. That represents about 9% of the overall public safety center cost. So definitely a smaller portion that's attributable to new development and eligible for impact fee revenues. Noting that, there are a lot of other revenue sources that are going to be looked at and coming into play for the ultimate financing of the Public Safety Center. Some of those funds are going to be out of the general fund. There was already a generous grant from the Pennington Foundation of $5 million. The sale of city properties is proposed, and so that $2.9 million that I was just noting for the impact fee portion, that's what we're here to potentially consider this evening. The city is looking at other philanthropic sources to make up some of the remaining money, and if needed, does have the option to bond for those monies. So shifting gears here, digging into really the meat of the impact fee documents that you have before you tonight. This slide provides an overview of the steps taken. It's also in your staff report. So first off, how did this police facility impact fee get created? We started with the service area boundary. By law, you cannot have a service area boundary that includes the entire city. So what we have is what we're calling a Swiss cheese boundary that excludes lands where the city doesn't provide primary police services. And these are lands that already have primary police services provided by the Nevada System of Higher Education, the Reno Tahoe Airport Authority, or tribal lands. So RPD does provide some secondary support, but not primary, and therefore eligible for exclusion. Once we had this service area defined, what we did was we turned to the parcel level population and employment projections that are created by the Truckee Meadows Regional Planning Agency, and to use those as our land use assumptions for the 10-year time period from 2020 to 2030. And these growth projections are estimates. They note change in population and employment. They're based on the zoning districts that have been found in conformance with the city's master plan. And what's really important to note here is that they are already in use as part of the Regional Road Impact Fee Program. And that's something that this particular committee has seen in the past before. So really trying to be consistent there on the land use side of things with a program that we already know it's in place and working as part of our code. So for the purposes of the proposed police facility impact fee system, we take those TMRPA land use assumptions, we convert them into 4 land use categories because we have to have 4 land use categories per state law. And that's really what comprises our service unit. So we're measuring here is the service unit people, in the form of residents and employees. And so that's where you can see this almost 31,000 residents over the next 10 years and a bit over 18,800 employees over the next 10 years. So once we have those service units, what we do is we actually allocate the cost of the expanded portion of the Public Safety Center to those service units. And what we've done with this particular program is propose a blended approach. It takes an average of the proportion of service units by each of the 4 land use categories and calls for service that are associated with each of those different land use types, and takes an average. And really the goal there is to create an allocation approach that does acknowledge overall growth creates a demand for police facilities, but that certain land use types do have variable calls for service. So that was the intent on that front. And then with the cost per service unit, after we got our allocation, what we ultimately do is take that cost per service unit and multiply it by generation factors for population and employment. And again, we've tried to be really consistent here in terms of the development types. We're trying to stay exactly the same as the regional road impact fee so that when you come in for a building permit, you are submitting an impact fee for police facilities in the exact same category as the impact fee for regional road impact fee as well. So should be helpful on the user side of things and also on the governmental side of things. This slide and the next two give you the generation factors that are used for each of the development types by land use category, as well as some sample impact fees. So what you can see here, just walking through, you know, if you're a single family home, you have 2.5 persons per dwelling unit, that's going to get you to $125 per dwelling unit when you submit your fee. Development types in the industrial land use category, those do have lower rates per 1,000 square feet of gross floor area, mainly because those overall numbers, you have less employees, you have also less calls for service compared to, say, a commercial or a retail establishment. And here you can see for our office and other services land use category, those generation factors, they take a look at 1,000 square feet per employee, some are per room, some are per acre, and that's really to, again, be consistent with the Regional Road Impact Fee Program. So feedback, what have we heard when we've been presenting this particular approach to the development community? We have heard support for an equitable and proportional manner to charging impact fees for facilities needed to accommodate new growth. That's definitely preferred over the exaction process because that's less predictable for new development. But we've also heard continued concerns as we got to these groups regarding just the cumulative impact, raising of existing fees, layering on of new fees, and what that does to the overall cost of development. So, you know, the police facility impact fee as proposed maybe isn't the highest fee that you pay. It certainly isn't as high as a regional road impact fee or a sewer connection fee, but we definitely wanted to be sensitive to that concern. And even though it's in the next agenda item on your regular planning commission agenda, we have proposed a termination date in the draft ordinance that's 10 years or when the revenues associated with the public safety center expansion have been achieved. So trying to be sensitive there. And then in addition, we've heard comments that the city should definitely explore some other potential creative funding options. Some of those might be public-private partnerships, design, build, and leaseback options. I did check in with our public works staff. Those are options that have been explored. They each present some slight challenges, and so our public works staff, it feels like moving forward with a publicly constructed project at this time is the best option. So next steps, as I mentioned, there's another item before you tonight. That would be a review of the draft enabling ordinance. So basically the Title 18 text amendment that would put into effect a police facility impact fee. The next steps are city council steps. That would be on March 25th and April 22nd required public hearings. State law requires that these public hearings have very specific topics. One is only on the land use assumptions, and the other is only on the CIP adoption and the imposition of an impact fee, not impost. Sorry, noticing that typo on the slide. And assuming, we move forward to that step in the process, there would be an ordinance introduction and potentially an ordinance adoption on May 13th of 2020. And that would be kind of as fast as a ordinance could move forward and be in place. So the action that you see on this slide is the motion that's in your staff report. Certainly happy to answer any questions that you might have at the appropriate time. We do also have Mac Benson from the police department here. He can answer any questions on police facilities and overall service that you might have. So with that, I'll conclude and be available.
Okay. Thank you, Sienna. So this is a public hearing. I guess I do need to ask if there's any request to speak forms on this for public comment, Michelle?
Have not received any.
Anyone wishing to make public comment on this item? Okay. Nobody's rushing the table. So I'll bring it back to the commission for questions. Commissioner Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have one question about what we just saw on the screen. Termination date, would we declare that as a sunsetting of the policy or the ordinance?
That would be correct, yes.
Okay. Let's see, one more here. Could you explain to me about the offset? Because I read that twice and I don't know if I got it or not.
So in regards to a potential offset, that's a mechanism that is set up in the administrative manual. For those that are familiar with the impact fee program, it's a process that allows for development to construct an improvement after they've entered into an offset agreement and then get a waiver against their fees. So it's actually, the constructed improvements that are their payment of fees rather than, a cash payment. It is highly unlikely that we would have any construction of police facilities, just given that the one planned improvement in the CIP is the expansion of the Public Safety Center. But we are trying to be very consistent with the regional road impact fee in terms of administration. So we went ahead and left a section in there on offsets. But again, highly, highly, highly unlikely that that section would ever be used in regards to a police facility impact fee.
Thank you.
Commissioner Velto.
Can you talk to us a little bit about the kind of rationale for a cost allocation and figuring out the fee based on the amount of service calls?
Yeah, Michelle, if I could have the overhead. All right, so figure 2 is the graphic that shows the police facility cost allocation. So what we have, over time is this 10-year period where if you were just to allocate the police facility cost on the growth of service units, that would put 62% of that cost onto residential, 16% onto commercial and retail, 15% onto office and other services, and 7% onto industrial. What we did find in terms of analyzing calls for service, and that was done over a 3-year time period from 2016 to 2018, is that there are variations in land use types in terms of the calls for service that are generated. And these are on the actual parcels themselves, so they don't necessarily capture calls for service that might be associated with a vehicle on the roadway. And that is something, if you think about, say, an industrial development, they might have fewer employees and fewer calls for service, but some of those trucks might be involved in other types of incidents on the roadway. Same as, commercial and retail employees as well. So what we wanted to do is to be able to acknowledge that there are some uses that have higher calls for service. You can see commercial and retail, because you can see my notes, so you don't have to read the legend, comprise 34% of those calls for service, residential 43%, and industrial is lower at 3%. So definitely wanted to take a blended approach that would account for the impact produced by each of the land uses and connect that to the cost allocation of the expansion.
And then, so you figure out the percentage, so you figured out how much the facility will cost, and you took percentages based on the services from each industry, and then you distributed that to like projected developments?
The cost is allocated for the expansion portion of the public safety center, so that 2.9 million is allocated to the service units. And let me just kind of get to that next table. Will help show it. Okay, so here for table 6, you can see each of those service units. So you got the cost that's allocated there, but it's actually allocated based on the percentages of that average. And then the resultant cost by each of the land use types then gets divided by the total projected service units in that land use category.
And do you foresee, is there any reason to think that this this breakdown of service allocation would change going forward based on the way Reno is developing?
It is possible that it could change. Certainly, we have an opportunity to revisit the land use assumptions and the CIP every 3 years. It's actually a required review that you do revisit and then possibly revise every 3 years. What we've done is connect into TMRPA's population and employment modeling work. That's updated every 2 years with the update of the Washoe County consensus forecast. So there definitely is a cyclical process to update. I don't anticipate that there would be huge shifts in terms of population and employment over time. One of the things that we see is that, especially with employment, the overall percentages in industry types are actually fairly stable in our community. There's some slight shifts, but in aggregate, they haven't changed very much over time. So I don't think the overall proportion would change very much moving forward, but we certainly have that process to allow for adjustment over time.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Taylor?
May I just add one or two things briefly? Thank you. I'll use the table. Arlo Stockham, Community Development Director. I just wanted to elaborate just a bit on what Sienna mentioned. A lot of work has gone into this. The questions raised here were really the two crux questions we got with our outreach. In terms of the sunsetting, sunsetting in 10 years doesn't necessarily imply that the program ends in 10 years. The facility we have planned now would get funded in 10 years, but it would take a future action of the city council to extend it rather than it just be continuing indefinitely on autopilot. So it could very well be, if the community continues to grow, that some additional expansions are going to be needed in subsequent periods. So I just wanted to get that out there and on the record. And in terms, it gets very complex how you run all the numbers. There's a couple different ways you calculate it. Sienna went over them by people. People require police service, great. Calls for service is another way to look at it. We looked at both, and both our initial proposal was actually to go just with people and not look at calls for service. But through our outreach, it was rightfully pointed out that it was a little out of whack because it hit the employers hard and didn't really hit the tourist industry, the bars, the casinos, places where we have a lot of calls for service. So that was kind of an adjustment made based on feedback we got, and kind of the blended approach seemed the most reflective of actual demand for services. So Sienna's put a ton of work into this, and it's important for the city to get police facility improvements. And maybe you guys have some better ideas, but we worked through a lot of different scenarios in terms of what would be the fair way to do it, and kind of came up with this. Thanks for your time.
Arlo? Commissioner Taylor? Commissioner Hawkins?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The paper said the other day that Reno was going to sell some of its parcels. And I was just kind of curious, are we still going after fair market value, or are we going to sell it for pennies on a dollar?
I don't have the exact details of the article that you were reading, but the city is in the process of working to sell certain city properties. And that's actually a process that they go through on a regular basis to evaluate what do we have and do we still need it and should it go out for sale? But I'll let Arlo jump in. He probably has more details.
Yeah, I think I know the one you're talking about. In general, the sales are for market value, the best we can get. There was one site where the city took some action to sell it for below market value to support an affordable housing project that provided some very low-income housing. So that was for a special purpose, but it was kind of the exception, not the rule.
I'm all for affordable housing.
Sienna, question for you. So I understand that the headquarters building is moving in its entirety. Is there understanding, and whether you can answer this one or not, what's the city owns the existing headquarters, but it's no longer going to be used by the police? Is it going to remain as a city facility? Is it going to be sold? Is there a plan for that?
The goal is to sell it.
Okay.
And the last I heard was that there was some type of exclusive negotiating agreement on the property.
Okay, so that's why we're not factoring any of those square footages into what's going on here. And then I guess the other question I have is, and maybe this is just something I'm used to seeing, so that it's a capital improvement plan that is a part of this. So the capital improvements plan, but the capital improvement plan is really only for the new headquarters building. There's nothing in here looking at any additional, the need for any additional facilities with the growth and expected changes in that 10-year period?
Because the CIP is limited by state law to be a 10-year CIP, what's included are the facilities that are anticipated to be needed over that 10-year time frame. And so in order to continue to serve growth and the needs of our community, we have this expansion planned, as Arlo mentioned. Even though there is a termination date, the city council could take affirmative action to extend the ordinance beyond a time frame that goes past the public safety center expansion. But the really important thing to note is that would take an amendment to the CIP as well to add in those additional planned facilities, because you cannot collect impact fees unless it's a improvement that is identified in the CIP.
So I think that answers my question, but then, so the idea in putting the capital improvement plan together did take a look at the overall needs for the police department in that 10-year period, and none were identified beyond the addition of, or the new and expanded headquarters was the only need that was foreseen during that window.
That's correct.
Okay. And then just, I heard it, but I couldn't tell in here that the total cost of the project, that included the actual purchase price of the building as well?
That's correct.
Okay, so that's how we got to that number. Okay. Thank you. Commissioners, additional questions? Commissioner Taylor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a quick question. I'm not sure if it's applicable, but I haven't been here as long as everybody else. Sometimes we see projects come forward and they have a fee associated per dwelling unit. Mostly we've seen them with fire, like $1,600 per whatever. Will this mechanism help with that need? So maybe we don't, so the developers aren't getting dwelling unit charges is what I'm wondering.
It will absolutely help for that need for police facilities. You're correct in that $1,600 per door fee, thereabouts, was associated with a fire station. Whether it's for police facilities or fire facilities or park facilities, impact fees are acknowledged as a mechanism to proportionally allocate the cost of needed facilities to accommodate new growth in a fair and equitable manner. And so in kind of setting up the presentation tonight, I did want to note that we do anticipate those future work efforts on fire facilities as well, because those tend to be fairly large improvements.
Sure, and I think we see sometimes not being able to make the findings because the infrastructure isn't there yet and there's no structure to do that. So this at least is solving one of the challenges of infrastructure in the future for police services.
Yes, absolutely. From the infrastructure side, that is definitely true. It is important to point out that impact fee revenues cannot be used for operations, so it doesn't apply to the staffing side of things.
Thank you.
Commissioners, any additional questions, comments? We do have a recommended motion that was provided in here as a recommendation to City Council based on what's been presented to us tonight. Michelle, can we put that back up on the last page of Sienna's presentation?
I can make a motion.
Okay, Commissioner Taylor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that the CIP Advisory Committee forward a recommendation of approval to the City Council for the Police Facility Impact Fee Capital Improvements Plan, associated land use assumptions, and fee schedule.
Thank you. I have a motion. A motion and a second from Commissioner Velto. Any additional comments? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you for the presentation. Okay. Rapidly moving on in our first agenda to item 5, public comment. Public comment on any action item or any general public comment. Michelle, anything on this one?
No, I have no
Anyone wishing
public
to make
comment
public
cards.
comment under this item? Okay. With that, I will move it on to item number 6, adjournment.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, meeting is adjourned. We'll see everybody back here in 25 minutes for our regular planning commission meeting.